Nobody has more respect for women than I do. Nobody.
Hillary Clinton wants to abolish it, believe me. She wants to abolish our Second Amendment.
I think they didn't deny it. I don't think anybody denied it.
Other presidents did not call. They'd write letters, and some presidents didn't do anything.
Many people have come out and said I'm right.
You really do have to ask yourself, where does it stop?
Hello and welcome to Fallacious Trump, the podcast where we use the insane ramblings of an empathy vacuum to explain logical fallacies. I'm your host, Jim.
And I'm your other host, Mark. A logical fallacy is an error in reasoning that results in bad or invalid arguments. The logical fallacy we're looking at this week is the Tu Quoque Fallacy, also known as appeal to hypocrisy and you too.
Yeah, so you too is the English translation of Tu Quoque, which is the Latin phrase. And it basically is a way of distracting from an argument when you're being accused of something. Rather than address the accusation, you simply put it back on the person who accused you. Ideally, I mean, you can accuse someone else of it as a way of distracting. But ideally, I mean, literally the tu quoque means you too, so you're referring back to the person who's accusing you of something. It's like a kind of playground response.
Yeah, that's
really
what struck me about it. Yeah.
It's a kind of, that's right, as far as the logic goes. And so obviously Trump is quite keen on it.
Yeah, very adept at it.
Yeah, at a press conference in October 2016, Trump was asked why he still hadn't spoken in public about 4 Green Berets who were killed in an ambush in Niger 12 days before. Trump explained that he had written letters to the families, but not sent them yet, and that he planned to call later in the week. And he then pointed out how awesome he is compared to other presidents.
If you look at President Obama and other presidents, most of them didn't make calls. A lot of them didn't make calls. I like to call when it's appropriate, when I think I'm able to do it.
So Trump likes to call when he's able to.
When he's able to. Not like he's not busy or anything. Yeah.
No. So Obama actually did write letters. He made calls to families of killed Americans abroad. He met with families at Dover Air Force Base when fallen soldiers' bodies were flown home, which Trump did once and then decided he wasn't going to ever do again. Obama also frequently visited with wounded troops at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. So later in the press conference, the journalist pointed this out, and Trump kind of clumsily backtracked.
I don't know if he did. No. I was told that he didn't often, and a lot of presidents don't. They write letters. I do. Excuse me, Peter. I do a combination of both. Sometimes it's a very difficult thing to do, but I do a combination of both. President Obama, I think, probably did sometimes, and maybe sometimes he didn't. I don't know. That's what I was told. All I can do is ask my generals. Other presidents did not call. They'd write letters, and some presidents didn't do anything.
Now, Trump is right, to be fair, that some presidents didn't call. Yeah. And that is because they were presidents before the phone was invented.
Yeah.
So that made it difficult for them. But they often did write. It's kind of a tradition of the American president that fallen soldiers in combat, the families tended to get a letter from the president thanking them for their service and their sacrifice. Yeah. But really, more to the point, even if Trump was absolutely right that other presidents didn't write letters, didn't call, that's not the point. The point is,
he didn't. 12
days had passed between this incident and him even mentioning it in public, let alone writing to the families or calling them. That's what's being asked. Why has it been so long? Why haven't you mentioned it? Why haven't you spoken to the families? And he's just completely moved the, not moved the goalposts, but moved the conversation onto another track. He's moved it onto, I'm awesome. I do it. Other presidents didn't do it.
Yeah. But despite the fact that he's not actually doing it.
Yeah.
So he's just said, well, they're just as bloody worse because they haven't done it. And actually, there are many more of them than me because the president's plural and I'm only president singular. So that compounds the problem.
Yeah, and somehow he kind of claims that because he does a combination of calling and writing, depending on what feels good to him at the time.
Yeah.
The fact that some of them didn't call or write. That makes it worse. Somehow? Or some of them only wrote letters.
Oh, I thought when he said I do a combination of both, I thought that meant he did a combination of letters and numbers. So that's right. Sometimes I write letters.
he works
Sometimes I write numbers. That's right. Yeah, it's like something out of Sesame Street. And today's letter is the letter D.
Now, there's a kind of advanced tu quoque, which Trump likes to do sometimes, which is actually defend someone else by accusing someone of doing something wrong. And Trump likes to use this in defense of his most loved people who tend to be dictators. Yeah. And our old friend Bill O'Reilly was questioning Trump in an interview about why he respects Putin.
Putin's a killer. A lot of killers. We got a lot of killers. Why, you think our country's so innocent? You think our country's so innocent? I don't know of any government leaders that are killers in America. Well, take a look at what we've done too.
So interestingly, Trump decided to defend Putin by throwing his own country under the bus. And so, well, we're just as bad as them, which is like another level of tu quoque.
It is, isn't it? Because you kind of think, well, the guy who's elected to be the representative of the entire country, you would think he, in a kind of, just in a diplomatic way, as acting as an ambassador, informally and formally, you'd want him to sort of defend the country and stand up for it, rather than just say, well, what, you think we're so clean? What?
Absolutely.
That's the kind of
so
thing
weird.
A critic of the country would say. That's something that someone who was disparaging about the country, maybe an enemy of the country, might say that. You say, well, look at America. Look at what you're doing. Yeah.
And in fact, this is where the kind of the earliest uses, or the earliest kind of well-known uses of this came from, was from Soviet Russia. When they were accused of human rights abuses, saying, well, America lynches their Negroes.
Right. So it's, way back then, yes.
Yeah. And now Trump is also saying, well, we kill people.
Yeah. As leaders were. And he just kind of goes that. So, well, I don't know of any actual leaders of countries. Good old Bill says that. And Trump goes, well.
Like American leaders.
Well.
There's a few.
What?
Yeah.
And you kind of think that's the kind of thing that the White House hushes up or fails to admit to, or has it drawn out of them by David Frost some 5 or 6 years after their presidency ends, about the debacle in, the Far East. So, that's a very odd statement, isn't it?
Speaking of Putin, going back to the kind of the playground insult version of this is just my favourite example, which is from one of the debates with Hillary.
Putin, from everything I see, has no respect for this person.
Well, that's because he'd rather have a puppet as president of the United States.
No puppet.
And it's pretty clear.
You're the puppet.
It's pretty clear.
It literally is just like, I'm rubber, you're glue.
Yeah.
It's
no, you're the puppet. Well, that's why he'll never appear on Sesame Street, after all, because he'll just, Oscar the Grouch will be going, hey, you're a grouch. He'd go, yeah, you're a puppet. No puppet. Yeah.
They would definitely do that. If he had a sense of humour, that would be awesome.
Yeah. I was listening to another podcast, This American Life. There were these two psychologists that did this test on people's perception of their own performance, and it's named after them, this particular syndrome.
Is it the Dunning-Kruger effect?
It is. Yes, it was. Yeah. And it was Kruger who was talking about it on the podcast. And he said that those people who think they are doing very well are generally completely ignorant of the fact that they're not.
Basically, the skills that you need to know whether you're good at something are the exact same skills you need to be good at the thing.
Yeah.
So if you have none of those skills, you can't tell that you're bad at it.
Yeah.
That's the basic.
And also, you tend to big up your own abilities. And the more you big it up, the more likely it is that you're crap. So, and consequently, you could go on Twitter and you can look up that syndrome, and Trump and that are now, it's kind of a byword for people ignorant of their own ignorance. But, when people come up and say, you smell, and you go, no, you smell, and you go, well, that's...
Yeah, that's basically it.
That's it. And what it does is it just occupies the space where a contrary position would be constructed, but it's not. It's just contradiction. It's not even that, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. If he had anything to say in response to Hillary's accusation that Putin wanted a puppet and that's why they're in favour of Trump, he would be able to respond afterwards with logic and saying that, these are the reasons why I can show that Putin isn't in favour of me getting into the presidency, and these are the things that I would do which would be unfavourable to Russia, and so on. But instead he just says, no, you're the puppet, with no basis whatsoever.
That's the thing, isn't it? It's got no apparent reasoning going on. There's it's just attack is the best form of defence. Yeah. God, I hate him.
And now is the time, I think, for Mark's British Politics Corner.
So my example this week is bang up to date. This is in British politics, the forum, I was going to say cauldron there, which is probably about right. The forum within which the Tu Quoque examples come up the most is in Prime Minister's questions. And these clips that I'm going to play are from this week, from October 31st. And so let's just play the first clip. This is about this is the first Prime Minister's questions after the latest budget round.
Why did the government fail to find a single penny for neighbourhood policing in the budget?
We did put extra money into CT policing in the budget. That was on top of the £460 million that has been made extra, that's been made available for policing in this year. That is in sharp contrast to what Labour was saying at the 2015 election when they said the police should take 10% cuts in their budget.
Jeremy Corbyn. So there's the Tu Quoque going on. So he asks quite genuinely. I mean, what we're witnessing is two opposing sides reading the same bunch of figures and making the conclusions that fit their own reading of it and their own political from their own political point of view. So Jeremy Corbyn has read it and is saying, well, there isn't a penny in there for neighbourhood policing. And Theresa May responds by bandying some figures around, which sound as feasible and substantial as Jeremy Corbyn's statement. And then she adds to, it is in some way to discredit what he said and to lend credence to what she says. She says to him, right, well, in the 2015 election, Labour made this statement that police should take a 10% cut. Now, I don't think that in the 2015 election, Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party, and it still doesn't answer the question. So she's just...
it's irrelevant to what he's actually asking. She kind of almost answered it but she didn't address the fact that there isn't any extra money or any money for neighbourhood policing, but talked about money they've put into policing. So it's vaguely relevant.
Yeah, it's got the same word in there.
Convincingly relevant, if you don't pay too much attention.
And to add to the convincingness, she then says, well, you see, this is how sensible we are, because it's in contrast to what Labour would do. Labour are complaining when they did this. They are as bad as they're accusing us to be, is what she's basically saying.
And now this is actually an interesting aspect of the Tu Quoque, is that when you are accusing the person who's asked you a question or challenged you or accused you of something, then what you're really doing basically is calling them a hypocrite. If you're saying that if someone says, for example, oh, you eat too much fast food, and you say to them, but you were eating a burger just this lunchtime. That you're saying, you're a hypocrite because you're saying I shouldn't do something that you do or something around that. And it's not always bad reasoning or a bad argument to point out that someone is behaving in a hypocritical way. That's reasonable. If, for example, the Republicans said that the Democrats wanted to get rid of pre-existing condition cover in healthcare, it's okay to point out that actually, first of all, that's not true. And secondly, that's what the Republicans want to do. That's their position. But the point is, you do need to address the issue. You do need to point out that it's not true. You do need to say, actually, here's the evidence on my side of that. And then point out the hypocrisy. That's not a tu quoque if you do that. So long as you actually address the point and don't use the accusation of hypocrisy as a distraction tactic, then it's a valid thing to do, because people should try not to be hypocritical in their statements. Like with many informal fallacies, it's only a fallacy in certain contexts. It's a fallacy if you don't address the point that the person is making or the accusation that they've made against you. If you use it to distract, if you use it to take the argument in another direction, then it's fallacious. But if you address the issue and then point out, actually, also, the thing you just accused me of is something you do all the time. That's a fair point.
So I think, so let's play the second clip, because I think she does it again. So when, at the end of the last one, we heard the speaker saying Jeremy Corbyn, because at the beginning of Prime Minister's question time, the leader of the opposition asks questions of the Prime Minister in order to seek answers, but it tends to be a bit of parrying and a bit of sword play going on, and then it gets handed over to other members of the House. So the speaker calls their names out because they've registered their questions. So immediately after the clip we've just heard, he then asks this question.
Mr. Speaker, with school funding cut by 8% per pupil, does the Prime Minister and her Chancellor think the little extras are enough to end austerity in our schools?
And actually he's wrong, because overall per pupil funding is being protected in real terms by this government. What do we see in the budget? We're ending austerity, we're bringing debt down, we're putting more money into our public services. We're taking the country forward. What would he do? His policy would mean borrowing more, taxing more and wasting more, and taking us back to square one.
So actually her response, to my mind, begs the question, where is the Chancellor getting the money for funding this in real terms if he's cutting taxes? Because there's that weasel term in there that when she says school funding is being protected in real terms, which is like, it reminds me of, this particular minister has the full support of the day before he gets fired. It's that in real terms, and you think, what kind of fiscal, manipulation are they using? Something to do with compound tax or whatever, somewhere along the line, in real terms compared with what?
I do think that she pretty much addressed that question in as much as a politician really ever does. I think she spun it, definitely. But in terms of, a listener who doesn't know the details is left wondering which of them is telling the truth, basically, because either the school pupils are being funded the same or they're being cut by 8%.
It's been cut,
So, in a way, either she just lied or she spun a maths problem into something that sounds good.
Well, I think
she did address the question. If she had simply said, well, your proposal would also get rid of some funding for school pupils, that's a kind of more specific tu quoque or something.
And I think actually to a certain extent, as I said for the first clip, he's spinning it to suit his ends. He's spinning it because he's making the point that, what he wants to say is to really do away with austerity, to really support the public services in real terms, we need a Labour government. What's quite interesting is that when you said, I think she answered the question, because, or certainly in Prime Minister's question time, when you do that knife twisting thing, when you say, if we left it up to you, it would all be awful. What that does is it elicits such anger in the room that you kind of think, well, has she actually answered the question, or is she just stirring up ramping up the sense of opposition against what the questioner has asked, so that it sounds like
it's like giving a kind of smoke answer.
It sounds like she's negated the question. It sounds like she's opposed it successfully, but what she's done is just stir up the crowd with those rhetorical devices, which is, if we left it up to you, it would be like that. And the House of Commons is notorious for the farmyard atmosphere in Prime Minister's questions, which is very adversarial. And you're right, it just lobs in this sound bomb that makes her party roar with delight against it, with no formed logical reasoning at all. It's just raw. So my question is, how does one counter that? Because that's what Trump's one does. No, you're the puppet. No, you're the puppet. It just makes you angry. And how do you actually counter that? How do you counter a tu quoque?
Well, I think in the way that the first person should have answered it, by addressing the accusation. Mm-hmm. It's annoying. And something that we'll come to in a future episode, I think, is called the Gish Gallop, which is where lots of fallacious arguments, or lots of at least false arguments, or arguments without any evidence to back them up, are presented all in one go. Meaning that actually to respond to each of them in turn would take so much longer than just hearing them in the first place, that you inevitably can't respond to all of them. And so, in the same way, where you make an accusation of someone without addressing the accusation that's been levelled against you, then the first person who's trying to counter it has to have a choice. You have to make a choice whether to address the new accusation against you, or to point out that they didn't address the first thing.
Yeah,
and you can't do both. Yeah, so you inevitably lose part of the argument.
Yeah,
by doing that.
and if you're tu quoqueer, if the person that shouts at you saying, you smell, if you don't successfully do it enough, then you're going to lose face, and the crowd that's gathered behind the bully will go, you see, you can't deny it, can you? That's what's going on in the House of Commons, isn't it? They all gang up behind the guy at the front and shout, fight. They just go, fight, fight, fight. And the whoever is answering the accusation or countering the counter accusation is left in a strained position. And it is a strange position at Prime Minister's question time, such that it was noticed by the BBC political editor, Laura Kunsberg, who took to Twitter and said, why isn't Jeremy Corbyn answering the questions? But he doesn't have to. It's Prime Minister's questions time. He's the leader of the opposition. He doesn't have to answer those accusations levelled at him by the Prime Minister, which is frustrating because it means she gets the last word. So, and you can see this brilliant political parrying going on, and often reporters will score it as though it's been a boxing match to see who's won, who landed the most successful punches. There are no questions going on. It's just they're poking the tiger, each of them. So, it should be Prime Minister's tiger poking time. More letters for the acronym.
I think you're a fallacy, but I wanna know for sure.
Yay, it's a return to our favourite thing so far.
Reprise that one because we like it so much.
Okay, so in the Fallacy in the Wild, we like to talk about the fallacy of the week from a non-political perspective. And let's just go straight into the first clip.
I just wanted to do a good deed, like you did with the babies.
This isn't a good deed. You just want to get on TV. This is totally selfish.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. What about you having those babies for your brother? Talk about selfish.
What are you talking about?
Well, yeah, it was a really nice thing and all, but it made you feel really good, right?
Yeah, so?
Well, it made you feel good, so that makes it selfish.
So...
Whoa, what about you? There it is, right there.
Yeah, so Joey doesn't address the fact that he is only doing the PBS telethon to get on TV. That is exactly what he's doing.
He's sitting there in a tuxedo and a bow tie, isn't it? Dress shirt. Yeah.
So
what about you?
Yeah, he doesn't address that at all.
Yeah, no.
He points out that actually Phoebe's being selfish, and he comes up actually for Joey with quite a brilliant argument.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that there's no good deeds that aren't in some way selfish because it makes you feel good to do a good deed.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it's all about shifting the focus off him and onto her.
Yeah.
And it works. It works really well.
Yeah, even she's convinced.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in an example of accusing people of hypocrisy, we've got a clip from Fox News from actually a few years ago now, I think 2000.
For the great hypocrites themselves, Fox News.
Yeah, this was when there were some protesters trying to argue against an oil drilling ship, or rig actually, being taken to the Arctic.
Kayaks swarmed an offshore oil rig in protest. The protesters, floating more on hypocrisy than water, likely forgot that kayaks are often made with petroleum. Or that the boats were trucked to the stores, not towed by oxen, although that would have been fun. A local bike seller there voiced support, also forgetting that his wheels weren't shipped on the backs of trained elephants. This hypocrisy, the greater goods calling card, masks the aim to dismantle capitalism, an aim that would freak out those sympathetic business owners if they only knew. But consider the original goals of the Green Movement, which is to leave Earth in the same condition for future generations. It's nice. Yet they scar the landscape with ugly windmills like knife wounds on a Mona Lisa.
So...
Wow, there's conspiracy in there as well. That's great.
Yeah. So, the argument there is that it's hypocritical to protest against drilling for oil in the Arctic if you have a kayak, because that's made from petrol.
Yeah,
and that it's not okay to have wind farms.
Yeah,
because what you really want to do is leave the Earth as you found it, or as better than you found it, and that's making it worse.
Yeah,
so
whereas drilling for oil in the Arctic...
It's completely avoiding the fact that having a kayak is less of an impact on the environment than drilling for oil.
In the Arctic, and it probably comes from oil rigs in Texas, the nodding donkey things...
Yeah, or the Middle East or wherever. But the point is that the fact is you don't have to be completely perfect yourself in every way to criticise someone. And the fact that they were in kayaks, the fact that a bike seller who supported them has bikes that were taken to his shop with cars or with trucks, doesn't reduce the fact that actually they may have a good point about the environment and that we do need to do something about it. The only alternative is to say that unless you are a hermit, unless you live a completely carbon-free existence, you can't say anything about the environment.
What that reminds me of is was this phrase levelled at, I think it was Clement Attlee, that he was a champagne socialist, that it's like you can't espouse socialist principles of equality for all, access to health and education and jobs and workers' rights and equal pay and all that kind of stuff. It's hypocritical if you espouse that whilst at the same time coming from a well-off background. So Tony Benn, who we've did fairly convincing impressions of in previous podcasts, He was originally Anthony Wedgwood Ben. He inherited a title, which he then later eschewed, but he's, one of the left's socialist grandees. He was the embodiment of socialism and equality, and yet he was accused of being, and that kind of, in one phrase, that Champagne socialist phrase, dismisses socialism. You can't be a socialist unless you're poor. And I think it was Clement Attlee. Somebody should write in and tell us whether it was who was asked, well, do you think it's right that you have that you're drinking champagne? Do you think is that equality? He said, no, I think everybody should drink champagne. That's champagne socialism. We should all be lifted out of the gutter. We should all be able to live in a palace. We should all be able to drink champagne.
It's also, I think, about the level of hypocrisy, because that is important. I think where the Fox News example, if you're really generous to Fox News, you could say, yes, the people who are using gasoline to power the vehicles that they're using for their business, but are against drilling for oil, are being a little bit hypocritical, because oil drilling does need to happen in order for you to have a car that works. So there is a level of hypocrisy there, but it's not. It's a very small level, and it shouldn't stop people from being able to point out that there are significant issues with increasing the amount of oil drilling, or doing it in areas that should be protected, or things like that. Where if someone has an SUV, for example, and they say that people should have electric cars, that's a level of hypocrisy that's worth pointing out, because they are not doing what they think other people should be doing, presumably because it's convenient to them, or because they just like having a big car or whatever. But that is a point, because it's actually relevant to what they're saying. It is tricky, and it is context dependent whether this kind of reasoning is fallacious or not. Yeah.
Because so is that what makes it an informal fallacy?
Yeah, absolutely. There isn't a logical form that this can take where it is always faulty reasoning. There are times where actually it's okay to point out that people are being hypocrites.
So it's not the fact that it's in Latin that makes it a formal fallacy.
No, it's not that.
Or that it sounds satisfyingly like Queeg Queeg out of Moby Dick.
It's not that either, no.
Okay. I quite like it, though.
So we're gonna play fake news, folks. I love the game. It's a great game. I understand the game as well as anybody.
Yes, it's time for Fake News, the game where I read out 3 Trump quotes, 2 of which are real and 1 I made up, and Mark has to figure out which one is fake news.
I've had a bit of a knockback in my confidence.
Yeah, you're on 20% at the moment.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's all right then.
So,
yeah. So I'm getting, like 200 out of 1,000.
I mean, just purely by guessing, you should be on 33%, ideally, over a period of time.
Yeah.
So you've got some way to go to get up there. Now, this week...
No, you've got some way to go.
The theme is related to Tu Quoque, which is projection, where Trump likes to accuse other people of things that he does himself.
Ah, okay.
And it's a kind of it's part of a Tu Quoque where you haven't actually been accused of anything, essentially, and you're
flinging things out
accusing
there,
other people of things that you could be accused of yourself. So, is the fake news number 1? I'm not a liar like Cruz. Cruz lies. I've never seen any human being lie like this guy lies. Even Rubio called him a liar yesterday. In politics, you don't do that to a guy. Or number 2. Hillary Clinton is a bigot who sees people of colour only as votes, not as human beings worthy of a better future. Or 3. Obama thinks he's so great. He thinks he can do no wrong. Let me tell you, he's not so great. He was so bad at his job, I'm amazed he didn't get impeached.
Well, that last one sounds like it sounds like a sour grapes, bad egg, whatever, that kind of thing, actually, because he was quite good at the job. Yeah, he had a tough job because the Republicans controlled the House. But they're getting impeached in there. Sounds like half of a Tu Quoque when he's been asked about being impeached. And then what he's done is going, right, well, you think Obama's great. He thinks he's great. Talking about him, that must have been pre-election. Okay. That phrase when he says, not as human beings worthy of a better future, is suspiciously un-Trump-like. That's that's quite a nice sentiment. But that might have been an early coached one. Okay, I'm not a liar like Cruz. Cruz lies. Oh, yeah, because this was early on before he liked Cruz. No. Okay, right, even Rubio called him a liar. Politics don't do that to a guy. Well, he does it all the time. Okay, oh, my God. I think... Okay, I think number one is the one that you made up.
Okay. So you think that number two
Yep.
is real, even though you don't think it sounds like Trump?
Yeah. I think it's an early coached one.
Okay. And number two is real.
Oh, my God.
Hillary Clinton is a bigot who sees people of color only as votes, not as human beings worthy of a better future.
Wow. That must have been really early on.
That actually was in a speech. So it had been written down. That's why it doesn't sound like him, because he probably didn't write it. But someone else wrote that for him to say.
Yeah. And not you, even. Yeah.
Not me, no.
Right, wow, that is amazing, isn't it? Because that's kind of, you look at it and it just makes your eyes stretch and you think, what? That's Trump? Yeah, given everything that's happened since.
Yeah,
Okay.
so you think number three is real?
I do.
Number three is fake news.
Oh, man.
I'm afraid that's me.
Whoa. That's very good. Because it's got impeached in there, so it sounds like a response to, given that this is the Tu Quoque episode, it sounds like a response to somebody saying, don't you think you should be impeached? But he's talking about Obama in the present tense as if it's got all the trappings of being a real thing. That's why you're so good at this. That's right. Yeah.
Which means that number one
he really
is
did
real.
say that.
He really did say this.
Wow.
I'm not a liar like Cruz. Cruz lies. I've never seen any human being lie like this guy lies. Even Rubio called him a liar yesterday, and politicians don't do that to
Mr. Trump.
Wow. Oh, was that the interminable phone call to Fox?
No, that actually was an appearance on Breitbart.
Oh, God.
Breitbart Radio.
Wow.
So, yeah.
How many times did he get the word lie in there? Crikey.
I know. There's a bit of inconsistent comparison there as well, because he's comparing Cruz to a human being. So that's really not fair.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the scores.
Oh, no.
Which I'm afraid you've gone down to 18% following that performance.
Oh, yeah, but in real terms...
Yes.
I think you'll find that that's been ring-fenced and that my score has been protected in real terms in the next budget round.
So, podcast listeners, I need your help to full mark. If you think that you can make up a convincing fake Trump quote, then share this episode on Twitter, include your quote and the hashtag Fallacious Trump, and I'll pick the best one, and you'll be podcast famous. So it's time for the part of the show, which this week at least is called Voting is Not a Logical Fallacy. We're recording this on the 3rd of November, and that means that we're just a few days away from the midterms. Early voting has been going on for a couple of weeks now in some states, and hopefully I'm going to get this podcast edited and out in time before the midterms, where you will still have time to vote if you listen to this in time. Obviously, if you're listening to it after, it's too late.
Yeah. Yeah, why didn't you?
Yeah, but this is the part of the show where we like to talk about all of the crazy stuff that's happening in the Trump orbit, but we don't have time to talk about all of it because it's actually crazy. So this week, we're talking about the voter suppression that is going on in Georgia. There is voter suppression elsewhere, but we'll focus on Georgia for this particular conversation.
Other states have their own.
So the governor race in Georgia is being run between Democrat Stacey Abrams and Republican Brian Kemp. Now, Kemp also, as well as running for governor of Georgia, happens to be the current Secretary of State, which means that it is his job to make sure that the election is run fairly.
Ah, okay.
And he isn't doing a brilliant job of that.
No, or even just kind of standing up and going, I think there's probably a pretty obvious conflict of interest here.
Yeah.
You know, even if he just stood up and said, do you not think I ought not to be doing one of these?
Yeah.
Anybody? Yeah.
Well, I tell you, Jimmy Carter thinks he ought not to be doing one of them because Jimmy Carter wrote Kemp a letter saying, please step down from being Secretary of State because there is a massive conflict of interest here.
In case you hadn't noticed,
Yeah. But what's happening, unfortunately, in Georgia is that there is a significant amount of voters who are being purged from the voter rolls. And he's actually doing it in a number of ways. He introduced a rule called exact match, which means that if the name that you write on your voter registration information does not exactly match in terms of, you know, perfectly written middle name and hyphens and apostrophes and anything in the right place, if it doesn't match the information that the state has from your DMV records or your Social Security records, then they will suspend your voter registration and you will not be registered to vote. And they have suspended 53,000 voter registrations because of this rule.
Wow.
Now,
hell.
Yeah. The big thing about that is that although Georgia has a demographic makeup which is about 30% African American, who typically are more likely to vote Democrat, of those 53,000 registrations, about 70% of them are actually African American.
Yeah.
So it is disproportionately disadvantaging that demographic. And the reason for that is basically because these are typically newer registrations and there has been a drive to get the vote out in that community over the last couple of years since Trump.
Yeah.
So that's a significant issue, but that is actually just a small part of it because Georgia has actually purged 10.7% of its total voters over the last 2 years.
Wow.
And there are good reasons for some of that. If people have moved, for example, or died, then they need to be taken off the roll. So some of that is legitimate. But in fact, Greg Palast, journalist, investigated and found that 340,143 of those voters were wrongfully purged in 2016 and 2017.
Yeah.
So they should still be on the voter rolls.
Yeah.
And they were taken off in some cases because they hadn't voted in 2016. But actually, that doesn't mean they shouldn't be able to vote in this upcoming election.
I mean, it's your right not to vote as much as your right to vote. They should...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But also, these people aren't necessarily being told that their voter registration has been removed. So people don't always necessarily know.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. They are often sent a postcard to say that they've been removed from the voter rolls, and if this is a mistake, they can re-register. They've also refused or rejected absentee ballots based on handwriting analysis of the signatures, and any signatures which don't appear to match the signatures they have on file. If the kind of S is a bit too squiggly or anything like that, they have been holding those from getting through. And again, a study found that non-whites were much more likely to have their absentee ballots rejected than white voters.
Yeah. So, despite Trump's accusation that Hillary sees them not as worthy of a better future, people of colour.
Now, you could say that all of this is a coincidence, all of it is just unfortunate, but actually Kemp has been recorded as saying that voter turnout continues to concern him, especially if everyone uses and exercises their right to vote.
Right, yeah.
So that's
well, it
bad.
will concern him directly because he will not get in. Yeah,
exactly. And the last thing that they've been doing, or at least another thing that they've been doing, is actually shutting down polling stations. Since 2012, the state has shut down 214 polling stations.
Wow.
Most of them in poor, rural, non-white areas where voters
where
have fewer resources to travel to further away polling places.
Wow. It's the kind of stuff that the International Electoral Commission accuses dictatorial African governments of doing. That's the whole point of getting the Electoral Commission in from outside is to prevent African dictators from doing this. And here it's happening in Georgia. They do it in Africa for exactly the same reasons. Wow.
Yeah. So this is obviously quite negative. It's not the only place it's happening. There are things that people can still do even if they think they should be registered to vote. If you go to vote and they tell you you're not on the roll and you think you should be, then you can ask for a provisional ballot, and you can they'll have to give you a provisional ballot, and they give you a receipt, and they hold that aside. They don't count it at first, and they'll check that you are eligible to vote and that you should be on the roll.
Right.
And if you are, then they'll count the ballot. And generally, in the past, around 60 to 70% of provisional ballots have ended up counting in elections. So that's very much worth doing if you think you should be on the roll and you turn up and they say you're not.
Is it the same people that check the provisional ballots, or is that an independent electoral office that does the counting will also check the provisional ballots?
I think it is the state legislature who will do that.
Right.
So, it's not guaranteed by any means.
Not in Georgia anyway, but yeah.
There are moves that help as well. Some of these things have been taken to court, and judges have ruled just in the last few days that they're not allowed to refuse. For example, the handwriting analysis rule is not allowed to stand. Those absentee ballots have to be treated as provisional ballots at the moment.
Yeah.
So some of this is being actually struck down, but obviously there isn't a lot of time. So when things go to court, when it's a couple of weeks before the midterms and the vote is going to come through, and then after that it doesn't matter. There's not always enough time to do things like that. I've also heard, but I have had trouble verifying, that the Department of Motor Vehicles in Georgia has been shut over the weekends for the last couple of weekends, which is where you need to go if you need to get new ID in order to be able to vote.
Yep.
So they're just making it as hard as possible. For everyone to vote.
Which is indicative of the fact that they must know that they're not particularly popular, or, that's something, as my mum would say, they don't think very highly of you. Get out there and register and make sure you are registered and get your ID up to date. And
get out there and vote. Yeah. There are states, obviously a lot of states, there's been early voting happening over the last couple of weeks. There's also some states where you can register on election day. So if you haven't registered, but you still want to vote, which you should, you can take ID and proof of residency in the state.
Right there and then.
In California, Colorado, Connecticut, DC, Hawaii, Idaho, Illinois, Iowa, Maine, Minnesota, Montana, New Hampshire, Utah, Vermont, Washington, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. So if you live in any of those states and you're not registered, you can take your proof of ID, take your proof of residency to the polling place on election day, and you'll still be able to vote.
Do it. No excuse.
Absolutely. Check vote411.org for the requirements in your state to vote. If you're not sure whether you're registered, I think you can look up on there to see whether you're registered. If you need to know what kind of ID you need to take, it's all on that site, and you can find out, and you can vote on Tuesday, and just make sure that good things happen and not bad things.
And finally, some things we really don't have time to talk about.
A couple of idiots called Jacob Wohl and Jack Berkman tried to pull off the stupidest crime ever, framing Robert Mueller for rape. Despite multiple reports of women coming forward having been offered money to claim Mueller raped them, the pair still went ahead with an amazingly inept press conference, which they held at a Holiday Inn in Roslyn, Virginia. Unfortunately, the alleged victim was unable to make it at the last minute. The FBI are now investigating in between bouts of uncontrollable laughter. Actually, this whole thing was so ridiculously badly planned and badly executed that I think we might have to take some time in the next episode to just go into detail on it.
Well, it seems to me to be like a bad tribute act to the Kavanaugh conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Isn't it? It's like kind of, well, they did it to Kavanaugh, so we'll do it to Mueller. And then you realise, well, actually, they didn't do it to Kavanaugh because it wasn't a conspiracy.
Yeah,
that was
actually, it's not as easy as it
was
looks.
The truth, yeah. 14 pipe bombs were mailed to prominent people and organisations who Trump had frequently criticised, and despite Republicans claiming it was a false flag operation, the bomber turned out to be a Trump supporter. Trump, of course, denies any responsibility. We might have to do guilt by association as our next fallacy.
Trump finally condemned Saudi Arabia for the murder of Washington Post reporter Jamal Khashoggi, but his problem wasn't so much with the execution as to how the execution was executed. He said,
They had a very bad original concept. It was carried out poorly, and the cover-up was one of the worst in the history of cover-ups.
So basically he stopped just short of saying, I would have done a much better job. I'm the best at covering up murders. Everybody says so.
2 weeks ago, Trump promoted the conspiracy theory that Jewish billionaire George Soros was funding an invasion of dangerous immigrants. Last week, a man named Robert Bowers, posting on far-right social network Gab, blamed a Jewish organisation for bringing invaders in that kill our people and said, screw your optics, I'm going in. And then he walked into a synagogue with an AR-15 and killed 11 people. Trump, of course, denies any responsibility. Forget what I said earlier, we're doing post hoc ergo proctor hoc next.
On her recent trip to Cairo, Melania racked up a $95,000 hotel bill in a hotel she stayed in for 6 hours.
What?
Where the most expensive suite is $700 a night. I know divorce lawyers are expensive, but I didn't know you could order them on room service.
6 hours for $95,000. Yeah, it's got to be a divorce lawyer. Trump is sending anywhere from 5,000 to 15,000 troops to the border to deal with the imminent arrival of the Central American migrant caravan. No word so far on what the troops will do for the 7 weeks it's likely to take the refugees to walk the nearly 1,000 miles they still have to go. So long as the troops are on their way before the midterms, we're not sure Trump cares that much.
Just for fun, though, in case any soldiers are still there when the migrant caravan arrives, this week Trump said he had authorised them to shoot any people throwing rocks at soldiers, because there's not much difference between a rock and a gun. Leaving aside for the moment that shooting unarmed civilians is probably a war crime, I think he's onto something here. Can we just swap people's AR-15s for a bag of gravel? Because there's not much difference.
No. Trump wants to end birthright citizenship. The fact that it's literally guaranteed by the 14th Amendment doesn't seem to bother him, as he says.
I believe that you can have a simple vote in Congress, or it's even possible, in my opinion, this is after meeting with some very talented legal scholars, that you can do it through an executive order.
Let's face it, Trump does not have access to any talented legal scholars. If he did, he wouldn't need Rudy Giuliani.
Former Fox News correspondent Heather Nauert is apparently Trump's top pick for the next UN ambassador. Quick reminder, this is the woman who cited the D-Day landings as an example of the strong relationship the US has with Germany.
Okay, she's going to be great. The Topeka Capital Journal reported that a rally in Kansas with Trump's world-altering, rabble-rousing, radical campaign supremo Steve Bannon attracted around 25 people in a Holiday Inn in North Topeka, including the event's organisers and a group following Mr. Bannon for a documentary. Invites for the rally, dubbed Red Tide Rising, were sent out via text message. Mr. Bannon told those that gathered, if Trump supporters did not vote in the midterm election, we're going to lose this. Looks like it's going to be really close if 25 is going to make the difference. Oh, did I say 25? I meant 63 million.
So that's all the bad arguments and faulty reasoning we have time for this episode. If you hear Trump say something stupid and wonder if it's a fallacy, email us on fallacioustrump@gmail.com or find us on Twitter @fallacioustrump.
If you think we've used a fallacy ourselves, let us know. And if you've had a good time, please give us a review on iTunes, Stitcher or wherever you get your podcasts. You can support the show on our Patreon page at patreon.com/ftrump, just like our newest patrons, Jude Searles and Andrew Payne. 2 new ones this week. Fantastic, guys. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jude and Andrew. And thanks also to Brian Schwimmer for editing your pledge upwards this week. Yeah. We also have a Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/fallacioustrump, where we'll post some links to some of the stuff we've talked about in this episode. And we also currently have a competition that you can only enter by joining the Facebook group. And the competition prizes are things like a copy of the book that this podcast is based on, a couple of other books that I've written, and a album from Mark's band that he's in, and also, most importantly, the opportunity to choose the next fallacy that we will do after the closing date. Go onto the Facebook group, join the group, and then you can enter the competition. It's not complicated, you don't have to do anything difficult. I don't know what you'd have to do, difficult things to enter a competition, but you don't have to do any of them.
Competition question? No, there's nothing. Just, no. It's easy. Do it. All music is by The Outbursts and was used with permission. So until next time on Fallacious Trump, we'll leave the last word to the Donald.
That's right. Go home to mommy. Bye. Bye.